Hey guys, it's Coach Matheu here with another video in our Play Like a World Champion series. And today I wanted to talk about the person who takes the title from Emmanuel Lasker, and that is Jose Raul Capablanca from Cuba. Capablanca is able to wrestle the title from Lasker in 1921 by defeating him in a match, and then he holds on to his title for 6 years. That's not 27 years, but that's still a super impressive feat. Um, and it would be just inappropriate, wrong, a whole bunch of other bad words that I can't think of. I hope my English professors forgive me. If I didn't discuss or show an endgame of Capablanca to really show his mastery and what made him an all-time great. So instead of going through a whole game, I wanted to start in the end game and show how Capablanca brings home the full point. So here we have Capablanca playing white against Conde in 1919 Hastings. And let's get into it. Okay, so before we go through some moves, it's just important to take stock into the end and what's going on here. So here, white is up a pawn. So we got 3, 6, 7 versus 3, 6. What else? White also has these double pawns, as does black. And typically you'd say something like, double pawns are bad, you should avoid them. And that's true, but Capablanca would also point out a weakness is only a weakness if it can be attacked. And here, I would argue, white's f5 pawn is a lot more of a strength than it is a weakness. For one, it's tying down both of the f pawns. So black can move neither pawn. Neither pawn can move here. And that's going to come into play because if you can't move these, you'll have to move something else. And you may not want to, as we'll see. In addition, it denies the king entry into white's position through the e6 square. So I think this pawn is a major asset. And in the meantime, the pawn behind it still has squares to move. And if white can get these pawns going, it may actually start to seem like 4 pawns versus 2 on the king side. So there's that. But another thing here, there are no passed pawns. And I like my students to tell me in the endgame, passed pawns win endgames. And at the moment, neither side has a passed pawn. So yeah, you can be up a pawn, but it's not so easy to win if you don't have a passed pawn. Another key feature, the kings. In the endgame, the king becomes a piece, and the king needs to be in the center. There's no debates, there's no ifs, there's no, well, the king needs to be in the center in the endgame. The king is a piece, the king needs to be active. If you want to play like a world champion, activate your king in the endgame. Don't wait, activate. King needs to be active in the endgame. And at the moment, black's king is a lot more active than white's and is closer to the center. But Capablanca's a great, so he manages to neutralize this. Pretty impressive. So let's jump in. So far, big question here. Who is going to get a passed pawn? So Capablanca's turn, he plays a4, freezing the black pawn on a5. Nice move. Just one less pawn that black can move now. So now the f pawns can't move, and now the a pawn can't move, tying black down. So now d5, black plays d5. Active move. If you take, king takes, and now this king is firmly planted in the center, and he's headed to c4, then b3 to chomp on the pawns, and those 2 passed pawns will be too much. They're getting escorted by the king. That's game over. That's decisive. So white really does not want to trade these pawns. There's just no reason to do so. And instead, Capablanca goes b3. And this is kind of cool, I would say, because now black plays d4. And look at that. Black has the passed pawn. And I would be worried here. However, there's something to point out. This pawn, this d4 pawn, is not getting away from this king. So let's say white played h4. If you play d3, I can go king e2. If you go d2, I go king e2. And now you're so far from your pieces, or from your king that is, and your other pawns, that I'm just going to chomp on the pawn. And this is not going to be good for black. Eventually, I'll be able to invade on d5. I can make the king run out of moves by moving my pawns, and I'll just take everybody and promote like 1 or 2 queens if I'm in a good mood. So the pawn is passed, but it isn't too much of a threat to the king. It's not something you dismiss, but this king can still track it. So d4. Now white plays f4. This is white beginning to mobilize the kingside majority and making sure this king does not find activity through e5. This pawn will become supremely more dangerous if it can be escorted by the black king down the board. So f4, attempting to stop any infiltration. And this is what I mean. These pawns are doubled here, but they're doing a lot in taking away squares from the enemy king. e5 is under white's control. e6 is under white's control. So king d6, g4, just mobilizing the kingside majority. Now the h-pawn's frozen, so you can't move your h-pawn now. Can't move your f-pawns. Can't move your a-pawn. Can't move your c-pawn. That leaves only the king and the d-pawn. But if you go to move the d-pawn, let's say after g4, black plays d3. Well, now I can go king f2, and your pawn has stepped just a little too far. I can no longer be defended by anything. So after king e3 or king e2, if you go d2, you're going to lose a pawn and subsequently the game. So black is running out of moves here. So king e7, move the king. And now Capablanca plays king f2, activating the king. King d6. Where do you think this guy's headed? That's right, the center. King f3, king e7, king e4, king d6. So white's king has finally made it to the center. Now the d-pawn is completely frozen. I'll just capture. And black is left to just move the king. So h4. Now the kingside majority for white has been firmly realized. And now black has to contend with this idea of g5 at some point. This is a breakthrough. Breakthroughs in the endgame are important for two reasons. One, they break down blockades, and two is probably more important, they make pass pawns. So here the g5 move after f takes, h takes, h takes is going to give 2 pawns on the king side versus 1 on the king side for black. And that's going to be very easy to make a pass pawn out of. So black has to make sure that their king will be able to catch that pass pawn when it's there. So king goes back to d7. And this is my favorite part of the game here. So if we go back, let's just go back. All white has done is really just set up, patience, get everyone ready. His opponent can do nothing in the meantime. He's just moving his king back and forth. So there was no real reason to rush. But now, with the king in the center, all the pawns have moved at this point about as far as they can go. Capablanca's looking for the win here. And this is actually funny. When I looked at this position originally, I made a silly mistake, and I'll show in a sec after I show Capablanca's move. So if we analyze for a sec, we still want to play that g5 move. And there's nothing wrong with it. The idea, though, is we're going to end up with 2 pawns versus 1. But this king will be able to stop us. Now, ideally, we would like that when this king goes to the king side to stop us from queening our pawn, we can have some action on the queen side. Now, the problem is, if we move our king too far to the queen side, this pawn can march, and queen. And that's actually what I did originally, and I lost. And that's why I'm not Capablanca or any of the other world champions. So king d5 doesn't work. You don't want this pawn to start running. So Capablanca says, well, I can't bring my king in to infiltrate. Maybe I can make another pass pawn. So he plays another breakthrough on the other side of the board, b4. Beautiful, beautiful move. This is one of my favorite moves. Or this kind of move is my favorite type of move because after you reach a certain level in chess, and that level being when you're better than your parents, you stop looking at moves that are like this. Moves that say, okay, you're going to give up material because your brain kind of says, okay, well, there's too many moves to look at on the board. I don't have time to think about everyone. We're just going to narrow down the ones that just look crazy. And b4 looks like you're giving your opponent 2 options to take you. But eventually, if you want to get to that higher level, you have to start looking at moves that don't appear to make sense initially. b4 doesn't because it's like just giving up a pawn. But when you look a little closer and you get over that initial shock of losing a pawn, you realize no matter which way black takes, they're gonna give you a pass pawn. And that's gonna be a major problem because that'll be a pass pawn on the queen side and a pass pawn on the king side. And the only one capable of stopping a pass pawn in this endgame is the king. And this king is way better suited to stop these pawns because they're close than this king is to stop pawns on this side and this side. So b4. And now after b4, big choice here for white. I'm sorry, for black. And now a takes b4. Pawn goes to a5. The a pawn's now passed. Passed pawns are meant to be pushed. So run! a5. And king goes to c7 to halt the pawn. Now if you go a6, my king can catch you. But since the king went to the queen side, it's time to make some action on the king side. So g5, finally, ready for that breakthrough. And black is pretty much forced to trade here. Otherwise, you're taking on h6, and your pawn's becoming a queen anyway. So this is an example of a forcing move in the endgame. So f takes. Now f takes, undoubling the pawns. And now h takes. Now don't try to get cute and go h5 and push the pawn, because your opponent will also push their pawn. And then once your king goes to chase it, they can push the other pawn. So just take. Keep your majority simple. Don't give your opponent unnecessary counterplay. So h takes g5. b3. We got a runner. King goes into d3. Halts the pawn. Now if you go b2, king c2 catches you. King d3, king d7. The king is trying to play both sides of the board. In a way, he wants to go to a party on, two sides of the country. He wants to go to one in LA, in California, and he wants to go to one in NYC. Can't do both, unfortunately. Well, I can. No, I don't think anyone can do both. King d7. So white. Now, since the king is stuck in the middle, whenever you see a piece has two jobs, if you want to win material, or if you want, to, I guess, progress in that game, make the piece do one of those jobs. g6. Okay, I'm going to make you go kingside. So now f takes, and you got to go stop this pawn. After king e7, okay, well, now I'm going to go this way. And you see on the problem, you can't go to a party on both sides. If you go to this party, well, you end up missing this one. If you go to this party, you end up missing this one. And in the meantime, your pawns aren't that far apart. If you go pushing here, I can catch you. And if you try to be clever and go d3, I'm not going to take. That would hurt, because then you queen. I can take this one, and then when you go here, I can also catch you on c2. And in the meantime, there's still two parties going on, and you can't stop both. So that is why, after f takes g6, with queening promotion imminent for white, black resigns. So if we go back, you can now that we've seen it, you can kind of play through white's plan fairly easily. Okay, I'm going to, sorry, even if we skip them, freeze the pawns, make sure that black runs out of pawn moves. Even when they get a pass pawn, the pass pawn won't be able to move. Then I can prepare my breakthrough with g5. And when the king is frozen trying to stop that, I make a breakthrough to make a pass pawn on the other side of the board. And while my king is ideally and sort of perfectly placed to stop both pawns, the black king cannot stop both sets of pass pawns popping up. And bam, there you have it. White wins. So, as you can see, Capablanca was just amazing in the endgame. And this made him just so tough to beat, because you could, have a good game with him in the opening. You could be even with him in the middle game. And then just in the end game, he would start to pull away. It was like a machine. And he's actually the world champion that I wish I played like the most. Just that machine-like precision in the end game. Very strong. Too strong for Lasker. But he does lose his title in 1927. So we got to figure out to who. Until then, guys, take care.